Okay, let's take a look at a meta-analysis here. This one's a fun one. It's looking at animal-assisted activities as a way of treating depression. This is something I've seen more and more in the last 10, 15 years. Of course, I probably wasn't paying attention to it as much before that. But this idea that being with animals can somehow um, give us a sense of belonging or meaning or various reasons, but it may alleviate the depression. They also bring them in at EMU on finals week now, I think, because it's such a high stress week. So anyway, this is a meta-analysis. First thing I want to look at is just kind of the general sense of what we were looking for here in assessing a meta-analysis, and then diving into the results themselves. So one thing you certainly want to see in a meta-analysis is a good sense of how they did their screening. You want to see pretty specifically how they decided which studies to include and which ones to exclude. Ideally, it would be good enough that you could even repeat it yourself if you want, and that should be in their methods section. In this particular article, we see that they searched the following entire databases. Then it looked a little more specifically at the websites. This goes into once they found, this was just, the first section was just finding all the studies, then what did they do in terms of selecting. Now the point here is you may agree or disagree with their selection criteria. Their job as researchers is to be very explicit about what they did or did not do in order to consider the studies. So I like what I'm seeing there in terms of it looks very specific. Other things that you would want to look for, interestingly enough, you're not necessarily looking for whether the final result was, the conclusion was that it was statistically significant or practically significant, whatever the treatment is, in this case the animal-assisted therapy. That doesn't tell you the quality of the report. That, of course, is extremely important information, but you don't want to rely too much on that information until you have a sense of what the quality of the report actually is. So the quality of the report isn't determined by that practical or statistical significance as much. One other thing that's going to happen is they're going to be looking at several studies that are different sample sizes. So here they list out, they had 5 studies, and each one has the number of participants. They also did a thing I hadn't seen before, which was nice. Here again, you see the different sample sizes. They actually made the size of their box based on the sample sizes. It says box area is proportional to the sample size. And that's really important because a study that was done on a much larger sample, assuming that the methodology was the same as one done on a smaller sample, you really want to weight that higher sample quite a bit more. You don't want to give equal weight to each of these. And that's exactly what they did here. You have to kind of skim up here to see how they did that, the effect sizes. But basically what they did is they went through and they created an effect size that was corrected based on the sample size, so that by the time you get down to, you can see the original effect size and then the corrected effect size. By the time you get down to the chart, these numbers here are actually already corrected for, they're already corrected for the sample size. And that's what you want to see. You do not want them to weight all studies equally. It's not based on the quality of the name of the researchers, but certainly the sample size should be a weighting factor. when they do filter results, what we don't want to see is them just cherry picking out the bad studies. And that's one little concern I have with this meta-analysis. Maybe the reason I call it a little concern is they give you the data on all the studies. So they initially include this study, which showed not statistically significant, but it was a negative effect. That, in other words, the people who were treated with the animals actually had less improvement in their depression symptoms than the control group. And so what happens is that kind of pulls down the overall effect. And if you're a researcher who really wants to promote animal-assisted therapy, you don't like that study in there, even if it is a well-designed study. And what they did is they ran another set without that negative one. They pulled it out to look at what the effect size would look. As long as they're doing that as just a kind of hypothetical, in case you might know that there's something unreliable about this study, I suppose that's good. I do like that they at least included this first study here. The other thing here, it said, due to the Panzer-Kleblo study having standardized or unbiased standardized mean of negative 0.32, which was in the opposite directions, statistics were recalculated. I would have been a lot happier if they said, due to the fact that the Panzer-Kleblo did not use randomization, whereas the other three, if they would have based it on some methodological difference that this study did, it makes a little more sense to pull it out. Just pulling it out because it's a negative is a very clear sign of p-hacking or of torturing the data, as Matulsky says. That's not the great. Personally, I'd probably pay more attention to this, which does include the conflicting study. I want to see all the high quality studies that have been done, and perhaps I would go and look at this original study, and if I did have qualms about how they conducted this study, then I might look down there, and maybe that's what they were hoping the reader would do. But certainly they should not screen out just because something is conflicting with the rest of the research results. That the whole point of research moving forward is that you do have to balance the negative studies and the positive studies, and then put it all together. The final thing I want to talk about here in terms of a well presented meta-analysis is how are they accounting for publication bias. So the issue is that if you have a topic that's not or your study finds that something is not significant, the researchers are less likely to submit it for publication. The journals are less likely to accept it because they assume that the readers probably won't care as much about a non-significant result. And what happens is there could have been plenty of other studies that were non-significant or maybe even had negative significance. And so a really nice meta-analysis will somehow account for their non-publication bias. And there's ways to do that mathematically. And here we can see right after that they report to determine the influence of unpublished study, and they go through what they did. Their actual choice of how they handle it doesn't concern me as much as knowing that they're aware of this idea of publication bias and that they're taking it into account. So it gives me some confidence to see that right there. So moving to the actual results, and let's take a look at the one that included all 5 studies. Here we go. What are we looking at here? Well, this along the bottom is the effect size. This is a Cohen's d, so we're talking about numbers of standard deviation. How big is the effect? They're drawing the confidence interval in a slightly slightly different way than we're used to. But it's the same idea. So the confidence interval there on their effect size would be the far left side of the line and the far right side of the line. Those would give you the two numbers for the confidence interval. The middle is where I guess they're saying it's most likely to be, but it could be anywhere as low as down here and as high as up here, based on whatever methodology Brickell used. So Brickell, notice, would not have found a significant difference for this animal-assisted therapy because 0, which is the null hypothesis that the animal-assisted therapy had no effect, it's within that confidence interval. So it's very plausible that their sample was just a little high, and that really the animal therapy had no impact on the depression symptoms. On the other hand, McFarish, notice, even in the worst case scenario, the most conservative estimate is still well above that null hypothesis, that idea that the therapy isn't effective at all. So it most likely is somewhere around here, could be as high as here, as low as here, but even in the conservative bet, it's above this. So if we went to their study, we should find that they found a statistically significant difference. Panzer-Kopflo, again, did not find a significant difference. That 0 is also in their confidence interval. What they did find is their particular sample found that the ones who were treated with the animal-assisted therapy scored worse somehow on the depressive symptoms than the control group. Struckus also had a significant result. Wall did not. So you really have 2 of the 5 studies finding a statistically significant result. One that was kind of the opposite of the other studies. And when you put them all together into a solid effect size here, you get this diamond shape where the middle will tell you where they most likely think, based on these 5 studies, where do we most likely think the effect size of this animal-assisted therapy is. And you can see there it's 0.61 is our best guess. And probably it's somewhere around a medium effect size. It's possible it's all the way down here. Possible it's even above 1, like a huge effect size. Most likely it's in the middle of the diamond. Now what would happen if that diamond was just a little bit to the left, so that the confidence interval on that effect side, maybe it was a negative number right here? Well, what that would mean is that overall, the meta-analysis would find that animal-assisted therapy was not statistically significant. Just as with the individual studies, if that 0 goes through this diamond, we're going to say that it's not statistically significant. However, even if that happened, even if that diamond was shifted over a little bit, if I'm looking at this kind of the compilation of all these studies, I'm seeing that the most likely impact is most likely effect size is that it's a medium effect size. So I'm trying to pay attention here mostly to where the heart of the diamond is, being aware that it could be no effect, it could be a really huge effect. Those are both possibilities. I might also, if this was a topic that really interested me, I might go into this study, just because if that one's not very well done for some reason, then I can feel a little bit better about taking on this, where the heart of the diamond there is saying that it's a pretty large effect size. The other thing I might want to do, if this was a topic that interested me, would be to look at whatever McFarish did was a much huger effect size. Now, it could be because there's some bias in the study. It could just be because of a sample that happened to respond well. But each of these are going to approach the whole study a little differently. I'd be curious to know what McFarish did there, just in case there was something about the way in which he handled the therapy that was a little more effective than what some of the others did.